Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn. I'm Lauren Smith with the International Franchise Association, and we have a great 30 minutes lined up for you. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that we are recording today's webinar and will make it available later this evening on community.franchise.org. If you have any questions for today's speaker, please add them to the Q&A box and they will be addressed toward the end. Today's topic is Streamlining Franchise Legal Documents, and it is brought to us by Osler. Here to provide today's discussion is Julia Farr, Senior Manager of Osler. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to Osler for sponsoring today's Lunch and Learn. I'll go ahead and turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And thank you to everyone who is joining us today for this very exciting topic. Before we get started, I will just provide a little bit more background about me. So as Lauren mentioned, my name is Julia Farr, and I'm the Senior Manager of Osler here at Osler. And although I've been involved in legal tech related roles here for the better part of a decade, I'm not a lawyer. My background is in project management and process efficiency, which is why I have certifications that are related to both of those. I currently lead Osler, which is a self-serve technology tool for franchisors to manage the disclosure and contracting process. I work closely with business and legal teams within different franchise systems of all shapes and sizes to automate their standard processes, code their documents for automation, and streamline their operations. In doing so, I've had the opportunity to see our franchise clients use technology for their legal documents in a way that has helped them scale their business and, most importantly, grow. So what we'll spend our time doing today, we'll just start off by talking about what is franchise legal document administration and why it's so important to have a strong system in place, and look at what your franchise legal toolkit should look like. What are the pillars of a strong and efficient franchise document administration process, and how to determine the right approach to combining documents, systems, and tools. And like Lauren mentioned, we'll try and leave aside 5 minutes at the end for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please start putting them in the chat. So what are we talking about when we say franchise legal document administration? Every franchise system that I've come across has had slightly different variations of different documents or different components. So it's not a surprise that it might look different depending on what system you're looking at. But generally speaking, this process will include some of the same steps. One might be a pre-disclosure confidentiality or non-disclosure agreement. And that's really for the franchise systems that are concerned with the confidential information that they're putting in their FDD, and just to make it really clear to the franchisees who are receiving it that it is confidential. The franchise disclosure document, or FDD, where in the US there might be different variations depending on the different regulated states that have approved them, and to be able to keep track of which version you're using where. And in Canada in particular, we have site-specific disclosures. So any material about the transaction that is known at the time of disclosure needs to be included in that disclosure document, which is really fun. And then the contract package. So that will include a franchise agreement and any ancillary agreements. And that's where I find there's a lot of variation from system to system. And that variation doesn't necessarily have to be based on the system. It can be, different documents for, different transactions, like different scenarios. So for instance, maybe you need to include a training agreement if it's not a renewal, or maybe you have a special program that you're only offering to some people that meet certain criteria, and you use an amending agreement to paper that. So being able to keep track of all the different business logic that goes into what documents are applicable at what point. And to be able to customize those with franchisee specific information, which involves quite a bit of work if you're doing it manually. In some cases, you might be talking about post-closing documents. So maybe banking forms, or if you're providing financing, a loan agreement. And throughout the course of your relationship with your franchisees, you might be sending a series of notices. It might be for changes that are allowed under the terms of the franchise agreement. If they're in default, you might be sending them, one or multiple notices of default, or a notice of termination. And then finally, termination itself with a termination agreement. The important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about these documents and processes is that even though every franchise system is different, the common thread we see is a lack of centralization, which leads to inefficiency, which spells out missed opportunities. So in some cases, you might have disjointed teams and data, like that the data needed to produce adequate franchise documents is often gathered by different people or different teams at different points in time. And if you don't have a single collaboration tool, those people might resort to using other tools to keep track of the data, or even creating their own systems for keeping track of it. For example, sales might be comfortable using their CRM tool. Franchising might have a franchise management tool, or maybe they've created their own tool that they've built in Excel. Either way, this can lead to gaps in information between different people and teams that are involved in the overall process. And most of the time, the documents are prepared manually, which means that they are administratively burdensome and, most importantly, prone to human error. And, you know, I'm not suggesting that legal needs to be involved in every single transaction, but if they are, it's higher likelihood that things are being done more accurately. But then that can also be a drain on resources. So what is the solution? So a recipe for a strong franchise legal document administration process includes a couple different components. The first being the document templates themselves. So taking the time to prepare a strong franchise agreement and ancillary agreements that reflect industry best practices. And not only producing those to begin with, but regularly reviewing them and vetting them to make sure that you're adequately capturing any improvements you might have made for changes in your business, or for changes that are needed due to legislative updates. You know, maybe industry best practices have changed for like non-competes or joint employer stuff. So making sure that that's being adequately reflected in your document templates themselves. Having an FDD template that contains all the necessary content and is registered with the applicable states. And structuring those documents so that they're more they're easier to customize. And this is something that I've seen less and less, but I'm hoping it's going to become more popular because, you know, structuring your documents in such a way where you're not necessarily having all the customization taking place throughout the various provisions throughout the agreement, but referring out to a dedicated schedule or appendix that includes all that customizable data. Not only does it make it a lot clearer for the franchisee to read, it also makes it a lot easier for your team to populate. And that schedule would include things like, you know, the location or the fees or things like that. And in general, when we're talking about standardization, the golden rule is, you know, the 80-20 that you're trying to achieve with standardization. You're not trying to solve for 100% of your situations. You really are just trying to solve for that 80% and leave room in your process to be able to adequately handle those one-offs that are coming up. And so in conjunction with good, strong document templates is having a really good system or having really good processes. So having a clear process for administering the documents that you've prepared that's easy to follow is super important. You know, oftentimes I've seen external legal providers put together these amazing document templates, and then they're not necessarily giving you actionable instructions on how to populate them. And if that isn't clearly documented somehow, you might have a junior resource on your team that is you know, making assumptions or is interpreting themselves what to put in the documents, which can lead to errors in the documents. So it's super important to have a really clear checklist or instructions for completing the documents. And that should include who owns the particular data and where to go for it internally. And taking the time to undergo a full process mapping exercise, it seems like a lot, but it will save so much time and so much headache in the long run. So bringing together the key stakeholders at your organization, identifying how data flows from various owners into the customized documents. Once you've documented that into a proper process map, it makes it so much easier to visualize where the information is flowing, where there's opportunities in your process to make it more efficient, where there might be lag that can be shortened, or where there might be waste in your process that can be eliminated. And most importantly, where are there opportunities right now for you to leverage technology to make your process more efficient? Also, having a good system for storing state-specific FDDs. If you have a different FDD or variation of your FDD that's approved with different states, making sure you know where the most recent copy of that is and keeping track of which states you can sell in, super important. And lastly, tracking waiting periods for disclosure and customized agreements, making sure you have a system for keeping track of those dates and making sure that you know exactly when the earliest date is that you can move forward to the next step so that you're not losing time. And then tools. So let's talk about the fun part, technology tools. So what technology tools can or should be a part of your toolkit? First, let's start off with the most important, which is a centralized database for your franchisee information. That can exist in many different forms and is most likely to be something that you already have or that you can repurpose something else that you're using for the same reason. A lot of systems already have CRM tools that are used for lead generation and recruiting. So that's a really, really easy one to repurpose. It's important, though, if you're doing that, to have a strong partnership with your provider to give you flexibility to go beyond out-of-the-box setup and be able to go beyond lead generation, which is what those tools are typically built for, to be able to solve for this particular need. Not all franchise systems have invested in a franchise management tool, but if you have, that could be an option too. So there, especially with a franchise management tool, where if you're already using it for operational purposes, there's likely to be a lot of overlap between the type of data that you're needing for your documents and for that process and what you're doing with it already for operational purposes. Another option is to repurpose a productivity tool. And so with productivity tools, the nice thing about those is that they are very accessible. They're usually more cost effective, and they have a lot of flexibility to create the structure of data that you want to collect. Most are pretty user-friendly and have easily accessible integrations with email and other systems. The only thing to be very mindful of with productivity tools is that you are going to have to really build them into what you need them for. So there might be an upfront investment in effort to get them to where you need them to. And also just be mindful of security issues, just because I know in my experience, when we've looked at different tools, a lot of those kind of, easily accessible productivity tools aren't always super rigid in terms of their security. And then lastly, you could always repurpose something that everybody has, which is Excel. The only thing with Excel, even though it's great because it's easily accessible, is that it's really, really hard to keep it organized and to enforce best practices and data hygiene. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say you want to use your data that you're storing to build a report, and it hasn't been added consistently. Like maybe there's typos in certain entries, or maybe dates aren't being entered in a uniform way. Then you're going to have to spend quite a bit of time cleaning up that data if you want to be able to use it for a report. Document management system. So what I mean by that is just an organized repository of your franchise documents, where you can easily access what was disclosed and what's in the agreements. Now, a franchisee database solution might actually already be able to do this for you if they have dedicated fields for file uploads, so you can store the documents alongside the relevant franchisee data. There's also a ton of options for dedicated document management software. And if you're a Microsoft user, they have some native apps like SharePoint that can be repurposed for organized document storage. And lastly, you can always use shared folders. Regardless of which option makes the most sense for your organization, it's just important to make sure that it's secure and that it's flexible enough for your needs. And process automation workflows. So a lot of the database tools like CRMs and productivity tools will have baked in process automation workflow functionality, and they're pretty decent. Like you can pre-program automations for certain processes, like for instance, if you've sent the FDD out, for it to calculate the waiting period expiry date, and to set, or if you want to send an email after a certain trigger, those are all things you can build in. The only issue with using those types of tools is that nothing comes out of the box for franchising specifically. So you'll likely have to spend the time to map out all of your separate workflows and build them yourself in those tools. And then my favorite, contract automation. Some of the productivity tools and low code tools out in the market will claim that they have contract automation. What I've seen, like of the ones I've looked at, they're usually pretty simple, like very akin to a mail merge, where you have certain fields and you're programming them to be put in certain locations in the document. But if you are looking for something a little bit more complicated, where you're looking to go beyond like just having simple fields be inserted, and you want to have maybe optional clauses or logic that controls the relevance of an entire document, you would be better suited looking at a dedicated contract automation tool. Now, the only thing with contract automation tools is that they are quite expensive. And it also means that you would need dedicated resources who know how to code or know how to set up your documents in those contract automation tool. And also, I mean, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't take the time to set up your coded templates properly, you're just speeding up the production of bad documents. And if you're looking at solving for each of these needs with a separate dedicated solution, you likely will need to look at an integrator or a connector tool to be able to bridge the gaps between each of the different pieces of technology and string them together for one seamless process. Alternatively, we do have an option with Osler Dash, where if you're looking at a single tool that solves for everything that we just talked about, to be able to manage that entire process from one platform, Osler Dash can do that for you. So let's take a look at how it handles the functionality we've talked about so far. So with franchisee information, it comes with a franchisee database that is customized and and mirrors all the data that's needed for your documents, so that you can use it to produce franchise documents instantly and track their progress through the life cycle. So you can see here, if I scroll across, you can see all of the information that's needed for the documents, and then also certain tracking fields to be able to track the process. And we also will organize it in an intake form and group the data based on similar types of information. So, location or fees or term of agreement. And the database is going to be customized for you and for your needs during onboarding. And that's all done by us, so you don't have to worry about setting that up. And then document automation. So we do have a back-end contract automation part of the solution. So during onboarding, we code your franchise disclosure document and agreement templates, and we connect them to your franchisee information database. And then you can leverage that franchisee information to generate customized documents instantly by toggling the action button. So I just toggled the action button, and now you'll see within seconds, my customized franchise agreement package has just generated. And it also includes, we can program in business logic that controls relevance of certain agreements. Like you'll notice what I just generated included an amending agreement, or if you have a training agreement that's only needed on a non-renewal, things like that, we can code into the overall business logic. And for process automation workflows, because this is a solution that is designed for franchising, there are certain process automation workflows that are out of the box. So for example, to track the disclosure waiting period. So I'm just entering right now that I've sent the FDD. And now it's going to update for that franchisee the status that it's in an active waiting period, and it's going to calculate automatically when that waiting period is going to expire. And then it'll notify me by email once the waiting period is over, so that I'm not losing any time between my waiting period being over and being ready to move forward with contracting. The workflows can also be customized though. For example, if you wanted to do some sort of a data approval process where, it takes all of the information, summarizes it, and sends it over to a key person to approve. If you wanted legal integrated in the process, where you want them to be able to review the contracts, like a negotiation module, things like that, that can all be customized for you, in addition to the out-of-the-box tracking. And there's also a dashboard that has high-level or detailed insights based on the data that's being stored on the platform. And it can be customized based on the user type. And we can also toggle between multiple dashboards. So right now I'm showing you just, let's say you wanted a different dashboard for the region that you're operating in. And it all connects to the same data source, but just visualizes the data differently. And the charts are interactive. So if you click on a parameter, it's going to drill down on that data and take you to the underlying data that's meeting that requirement that's in the chart. And state registration tracking. So every platform comes with a state registration tracker that has logic built in the back end for for each state, what the registration requirement is. It allows you to keep track of any correspondence you're having with that state, and keep track of the status. It also allows you to see the status in real time when you're working on transactions. So I'm going over right now, and if I were to be working on a transaction for Illinois, for example, where I'm not approved to be selling yet, I can see that in live time in the record. And when I go to generate an FDD, it's not going to stop me from generating that FDD, but it is going to include a warning because it's not listed as a state that I'm approved to sell in. And there is a native integration with DocuSign and Adobe Sign. And it can also be integrated. We can build custom integrations with any other e-signature provider that you use. So it'll also, with that integration, it'll auto detect the fields, like the signatory fields, so who I need to send this out to based on this particular transaction. And I can authenticate into my own DocuSign account. And so because I can authenticate into my own DocuSign account, I can leverage any of my preferred settings, or if I've already set up certain DocuSign templates, I can go in and I can apply those to the agreements I'm about to send out to make the e-signature process a lot more streamlined. And I can also track all of the pending signature packages through the e-signature tracking function. And so that means that if different users are authenticating into their own accounts, I can have a bird's eye view of everything that's been sent out using the platform and keep track of it all in one place. And we can also do multi-relational databases. And so that means is where you have databases for non-franchisee specific data and you want to store that separately, but you want to be able to create relationships with the franchisee records. For example, if I'm a multi-brand franchisor and I have certain information that's standardized based on the brand, I could build a separate brand information database, store that information on a per brand basis, and then connect it to that franchisee just by adding a connection to the brand. And then that way it can pull in, if it's a different franchisor entity or if there's a set royalty fee, things like that. And then that will be able to pull that into the documents seamlessly. Some other features are organized document storage. It's mobile friendly, so if you need to be able to access it from your phone, and there's an open API for other custom integrations that aren't native to the solution. And so I guess just to be able to kind of contextualize some of our success stories and things we've done with other franchise systems. In one case, we actually worked with a franchise system that wanted to take a look at their entire franchising process, not just the legal document administration. And so what we ended up doing was we replaced all their systems with Dash, including their application process. So instead of having their franchisees fill out a PDF application and email it to them, we created a web form that connects to their platform so that when a franchisee or when a candidate's interested in filling out an application, they're doing it directly through their website, it's submitting it directly through their platform, and it kickstarts the screening process in the Osler Dash platform. And even in the last year, it's yielded a 50% reduction in time spent from application to contract signing, which was great. And in another case, we were working with a multi-brand franchise system that had their external counsel involved in all of their transactions, and they hadn't really centralized it or standardized it. So we were able to work with them to really standardize their process and build in a lot of that logic into their documents and into their process automation workflows. And that has resulted in a drastic reduction in legal fees for them, and it has really scaled up their operations. And lastly, we've done a couple conversion projects, but really those are interesting because, you know, if you're looking to convert your whole network to like a new form of agreement or something like that, you know, you're dealing with a huge volume because you're looking to convert, you know, like your entire network, a huge volume of franchisees, usually in a really short period of time. And so we've experienced a lot of success actually with a couple different franchise systems in doing those types of projects where they've leveraged Osler Dash. And really what was beneficial for them was instead of doing each of the transactions manually, and when they really mapped out how long that was going to take, even just making the investment, doing the onboarding, programming all the logic in upfront, and then executing it using technology, it ended up taking less time to do that in the long run than it would have had they just done it all manually. So that is, that's kind of, you know, Osler Dash in a nutshell. We do have a few minutes left, and I do believe there are some questions. So I'm happy to go over a couple of them. And if I don't get to your question and we run out of time, I have put my contact information on the screen. So please do get in touch. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me directly. So one of the questions is about the onboarding process and how long it takes. That's a great question. So we do develop a custom timeline for each client. Like once we look at their documents and once we look at their processes, but generally speaking, it takes about 3 months. Because we are coding documents, we are working with your team, we're working with your existing legal provider to make sure that they're signing off on the work that we're doing and that we're setting things up properly for you. So it does take roughly 3 months, but we do all the work for you. You know, we do all the coding, we do all the setup, and that's baked into the fees. So it's not necessarily like, it's not going to be charged as like a separate, you know, unknown hourly service fee. So how should we go about process mapping? Is it best to bring in a consultant? That's a great question. So I think it really depends on the process. So obviously bringing in a consultant is good in the sense that they have that fundamental knowledge of how do you go about doing this exercise? But it's really more important than who to bring in to facilitate the process mapping session is to make sure that you're bringing in all the right stakeholders. And they should, like a consultant should be able to help you figure out who all the right stakeholders are. But there will be a limit to what they're able to do. There really needs to be institutional knowledge at your organization. So I think the most important thing is to have the right stakeholders in the room when you're doing that process mapping exercise. And having been a part of it, I've facilitated a few process mapping sessions now with our clients. It's really interesting to see where some of the disconnects exist, even like amongst different teams on what they think happens for certain processes. So it's a really, really interesting experience. But yeah, I mean, I think if it makes sense, if there's a business case to bring in a consultant, it's always good to have someone who's a professional who has experience and who knows the right approach to doing a process mapping exercise. And Lauren, I think there are still other questions in the chat, but I do realize that we've run out of time now.
Perfect. Yeah, if Julia didn't get to your question, make sure to grab her contact information on this slide. Thank you so much, Julia. This was excellent content and excellent feedback from all of you. We really do appreciate it. Again, this webinar was recorded, and along with the presentation deck will appear on our website early this evening. You'll be able to find that at community.franchise.org. Thank you very much again to Julia and the Osler team. And again, thank you to everyone for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe and healthy. Bye.
Thank you.